Stephen King has made no secret of the fact that he does not like Kubrick's adaptation of his novel The Shining.
And there are an awful lot of things about that movie that I think are flawless and beautiful and just marvelous. And then there are other times when I feel as though I'd given Stanley Kubrick a live grenade and he heroically threw his body on it.
But why? Is he just upset because Kubrick turned his most autobiographical character into an unlikable slasher psycho?
Well, in some ways, I think his father, Jack Torrance, was as autobiographical as I've ever come.
Or, in his adaptation, did Kubrick change the story so much that King didn't even feel he did the original work justice?
One movie that departs considerably from the book that's a failure is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining.
So join me while I tell you the original story, highlight all the changes that Kubrick made, and tell you how Kubrick turned a story about a tortured dad into a slasher nightmare. Fully understand the context of the Torrance's stay in the Overlook Hotel and also what is going on with their family, there's quite a bit of background we have to get before they really start their caretaking. Most importantly to this are two characters that are not featured in Kubrick's film at all, and that is Al Shockley and George Hatfield. Al Shockley is the one who gets Jack the job at the Overlook in the first place. He's also his AA sponsor and was on the board at the school where Jack used to work. Him and Al got sobered together after a harrowing night where they thought that Al had run over a child while drunk driving. Al is also on the board of directors at the Overlook, which is how he got Jack the job in the first place. Thank God that Al vouches for him because, in contrast to the movie,
our people in Denver recommended Jack very highly, and for once, I agree with them.
Jack and Mr. Ullman, the manager of the hotel, do not get along.
The hotel's board of directors has hired you already, though, over my strenuous objections.
Ullman thinks that he will be a problem, doesn't believe that he will stay sober, and also doesn't believe that he'll do a good job taking care of the hotel over the winter. But since Al is on the board of directors, the decision to hire Jack has come from above him, and he doesn't really have any say in the matter. During this conversation, Jack also says the first thing that made me realize how different Nicholson's depiction of Jack is in Kubrick's film versus the Jack that we actually get in the original novel. Did this officious little prick actually think that he would allow his son to goof around in a rat trap attic full of junk furniture and God knew what else? One of the biggest differences, and this won't be the last time I talk about it, I'm sure, between the books and the movies is Jack's character. In the books, Jack isn't like an incredible guy or anything. He still broke his son's arm. He still lost his teaching job. He still has an extremely problematic relationship with alcohol, but he also isn't a psycho from the first second that we see him. He's kind of a tortured but well-meaning man who cares about his family. The way that Jack is thinking here is a way that I really couldn't ever imagine Nicholson's character thinking in the movie. Speaking of losing his teaching job, we also need to talk about how that happened and how Jack ended up in a position where he needed the job at the Overlook in the first place. As I mentioned, Al and Jack both had a drinking problem, and while Jack got sober and has been sober for around 18 months by the time they start their stay at the Overlook, unfortunately, drinking isn't his only problem. Jack has had a very hard time controlling his anger even after he's quit drinking. Enter our other major character that was cut completely from the movie, George Hatfield, who is a privileged rich kid at the private school that Jack teaches at. Jack coached the debate team, and George joins the debate team, trying to improve his public speaking skills so that when he graduates from law school, he can join his father's law firm. But George has a very bad stutter when he gets excited during these debates. Jack eventually ends up cutting him from the team, supposedly because of his stutter, although it does feel like there might be other motives for this as well. Jack doesn't really seem to like George, whether this comes down to that George was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, or whether his kind of like rich kid arrogance just makes Jack think that he's very unlikable. Either way, George feels that Jack has done him some kind of wrong when he cuts him from the team, and so slashes the tires on Jack's car in the school parking lot. But Jack doesn't handle it very well. Because of this incident, Jack is let go from the private school where he taught, and this is how they find themselves in a situation where Jack needs the job at the Overlook to support his family. But it's important to know, and this is something that, again, is cut from the film, and I actually think that this is an okay thing to cut because it's not a hugely important detail, but to me it matters to the characterization of this family, and that is that before this happened, the Torrance family was pretty well off. even with Jack being like kind of a raging alcoholic. This isn't the only time it's talked about, but I think this is one of the most visceral moments and one of the first where we really get the sense that Wendy, Jack's wife, is really starting to feel like their promising life is starting to unravel. Speaking of Wendy, she is not the same character at all in the novel. Shelley Duvall obviously makes an incredible performance in the movie, but that character that is portrayed is not the Wendy from the book at all. In fact, King himself called Kubrick's depiction of Wendy Torrance one of the most misogynistic characters ever put to film. From my perspective, I think that King is actually really spot on with this description of her role in the movie, but in the book, this is not the case at all. She is, in fact, a very confident woman who is very independent and is on the verge of leaving Jack because of his drinking habit and how out of hand it's gotten well before he loses his job at the school he was teaching at. In fact, to us as the reader, it almost feels serendipitous that Jack and Al have this incredibly harrowing experience where Al thinks that he has killed a child while drunk driving on the night before Wendy is going to talk to Jack about a divorce. Jack, I've been thinking. Have you? He lit a cigarette with trembling hands. No hangover this morning, oddly enough. Only the shakes. He blinked. In the instant's darkness, the bike flew against the windshield, starring the glass. The tires shrieked. The flashlight bobbed. I want to talk to you about what's best for me and Danny. For you too, maybe. I don't know. We should have talked about it before, I guess. Would you do something for me? He asked, looking at the wavering tip of his cigarette. Would you do me a favor? What? Her voice was dull and neutral. He looked back at her. Let's talk about it in a week from today, if you still want to. Now she turned to him, her hands lacy with suds, her pretty face pale and disillusioned. Jack, promises don't work with you. You just go right on with... She stopped, looking in his eyes, fascinated, suddenly uncertain. In a week, he said. His voice had lost all its strength and dropped to a whisper. Please. I'm not promising anything. If you still want to talk, then we'll talk about anything you want. And Jack sticks to his promise. He quits drinking that day and doesn't drink again. But even still, we can tell that Wendy's trust is tentative, that her trust has been broken by all of the things that Jack has done before, and she also puts Danny first, as any good mother would. Her concern for Danny is really one of her primary motivations for considering ending their marriage, especially after Jack hurt Danny when Danny was younger. The incident happened when Danny poured beer all over the play that Jack was working on. I think that the reason that Danny did this is because like beer foams, and when he poured it, it made bubbles, and he was just kind of interested in that. He was a very young kid at the time, but after that, Jack finds Danny after he's done this and yanks on his arm too hard, breaking it. People may disagree about this, and I think it's totally fair if you do. I never got the vibe that he was actively trying to hurt Danny in this moment, more so that he was being careless and drunk and irresponsible with a small child, which obviously doesn't make it okay, but I think it does change Jack's intention in the moment. But ever since then, Wendy has been scared that Jack will hurt Danny again, whether it's on purpose or on accident, and we can tell pretty early on that this distrust hurts Jack, and he feels like he's doing everything he can to atone for it, but feels like he's not being given the credit that he deserves for the changes he's made. There is some tension, though, because Wendy has a pretty constant internal conflict where she has to constantly remind herself that this is not the same Jack that did that, and that she needs to try to trust him more because he's sober now. But the incident with George Hatfield has really started to erode that trust again. But we've talked about Wendy and Jack, so now let's talk about Danny, and we're going to start with the elephant in the room, I think, which is Tony. In Kubrick's film, Danny is shown communicating with Tony by, like, talking with his finger like this.
What about Tony? He's looking forward to the hotel, I bet.
Supposedly, this was an improvisation done by the actor who played Danny, who, ironically enough, is also named Danny Lloyd. Although I haven't found any sources for that information that I trust. Either way, I think this is a great place to kind of start, where Kubrick starts to stray really far away from the source material. In an interview about the movie with Michael Cement, author of the book Kubrick, the Definitive Edition, Kubrick said the following in response to a question about how he sees Danny's evolution through the movie. Danny has had a frightening and disturbing childhood, Brutalized by his father and haunted by his paranormal visions, he has had to find some psychological mechanism within himself to manage these powerful and dangerous forces. To do this, he creates his imaginary friend Tony, through whom Danny can rationalize his visions and survive. I think that if his explanation was that this was a very intentional choice and that it was made because of the limitations of filmmaking or that CGI didn't exist when the movie was made, I think that would be valid. But to willingly misinterpret not only one of the main characters, but also his relationship with his father, who is another one of the main characters, just feels a little bit disrespectful to the original story to me. Also, Danny doesn't experience his interactions with Tony the same way that it is depicted in the movie. The second time, 2 weeks ago, had been more interesting. Tony, beckoning, calling from 4 yards over. Danny, come see. It seemed that he was getting up, then falling into a deep hole like Alice into Wonderland. Then he had been in the basement of the apartment house and Tony had been beside him, pointing into the shadows at the trunk his daddy carried all his important papers in, especially the play. He goes into a full hallucination and sees Tony as an actual human being in a vision. And also, Tony never really talks directly through Danny or possesses Danny like we kind of see happen in the movie. The way that Kubrick describes it and the way the movie portrays it would lead you to 2 different conclusions that would both be incorrect, at least according to the original story. One, that Tony is more almost of a split personality for Danny than a separate being who never actually directly controls him. And 2, that Tony isn't real. He is just a figment of Danny's imagination, as Kubrick says, through whom Danny can rationalize his visions and survive. We've also talked about several times how the first one isn't true, but also we have at least inklings that Danny is real. In the book, it is actually hinted at several times that Tony is just an older version of Danny. Tony is described as like looking into a magic mirror and seeing himself in 10 years. We also learn that Danny's middle name is Anthony, likely where the name Tony is derived from, which is just another hint that Tony is actually just Danny all grown up. I think that might actually give you everything you need to know before we start our stay in the Overlook Hotel, so let's get into the meat of the story. So if you've only seen the Shining movie, there are a lot of things we need to discuss that were completely removed for the sake of Kubrick's film, and firstly, and probably most importantly of those, is the boiler. You may not have guessed this from the movie, but Jack actually does have important duties as the caretaker of the Overlook. There are 3 main jobs that we will talk about in the scope of this video, and they are absolutely crucial to the plot. The first of those is venting the boiler. The boiler stood on 4 cement blocks, a long and cylindrical metal tank, copper-jacketed and often patched. You'll want to keep your press up to no more than 50, maybe 60. Mr. Ullman, he says to heat the west wing one day, central wing the next, east wing the day after that. Now you got to remember to come down here twice a day and once at night before you rack in. You got to check the press. If you forget, it'll just creep, and like as not, and your family will wake up on the fucking moon. You just dump her off a little and you'll have no trouble. The boiler is a pretty clear metaphor for Jack's anger issues, but besides that, it is crucial not only for reasons that will become painfully clear later, but also because of the area it's in, which is the basement, which is where Jack finds all the old scrapbooks about the Overlook. Now, I apologize, but I'm going to have to rant about this for a minute because, if anything, this is my biggest issue with the Kubrick film. Jack Nicholson is a fantastic actor, so I put absolutely none of this on him, by the way, but in the original story, Jack Torrance is not insane when he gets to the Overlook. He's definitely troubled and definitely has issues. He's not the best guy in the world, but I don't think for a second that he would think about intentionally hurting, let alone murdering his entire family. What really makes him crazy is the Overlook. In the film, besides seeing the Overlook come alive, fill with people, and provide him with alcohol, and then also seeing him in that picture in the last shot of the movie, there's really no indication that the Overlook did anything to prompt him to hurt his family outside of maybe his conversation with Grady. He's basically just horrible to his wife, constantly creepy and unsettling, and there is no slow descent into madness. More so, it feels like they took a man who was already on the edge of losing it and trapped him in a hotel alone with his family, and that pushed him over. King often says this about the Kubrick film.
Cold. I'm not a cold guy. I mean, I think one of the things that people relate to in my books is there's a warmth, there's a reaching out and saying to the reader, I want you to be a part of this.
But I think what he says really gets down to the core of why, although The Shining is an incredible movie, and don't get me wrong, I do love The Shining movie, it is a very poor adaptation of the novel. At the core of the original story is really this care and concern from Jack about his family and his guilt about not doing right by them that is twisted and warped by the Overlook. But what really starts Jack off on his road to madness is an obsession with the history of the hotel. Before I start, I just want to say that I swear this is relevant to the story, and I think it's interesting. King really did write a whole backstory for this place. Plus, I'll try to keep it as short as I can. Also, thank you to Marvelous Videos for summing some of this stuff up so well in a video. I've made sure to link it in the description below. This video was really helpful in getting like a good overview, although I did have to do some other research, but great starting point. You should check it out if you're interested in the topic. The Overlook was built between the years of 1907 and 1909 and opened on June 1st, 1910 by a man named Robert Townley Watson, who is the grandfather of the current maintenance man, Pete Watson. During construction and the early years of the hotel being open, both Robert's wife and his son died on the grounds of the hotel, leaving it to have a reputation for misfortune very early on in its existence. But regardless of that reputation, the hotel quickly became a place for the elite and powerful to both have luxurious retreats and to hatch nefarious plans. This really starts with Henry Ford staying there in the 1920s, and that popularized it, leading to many stars like Clark Gable and Jean Harlow staying there, as well as politicians like Warren G. Harding and Richard Nixon.
Well, I'm not a crook.
The only extremely notable event from this time was a woman named Lorraine Massey, who took her own life in room 217. This event is also kind of echoed in the movie, but they changed it to room 237. I'm not sure what the reason for the change is, but it is the same event, and it's portrayed pretty accurately in the movie. She was the wife of a famous lawyer and was known to have extramarital affairs with men much younger than her. One of those times, the man that she was with left her in her room, stole her car, and disappeared. So she took some sleeping pills, drank a bunch of alcohol, and was found dead in the bathtub the next day. Again, this is really only a notable event because of the events that happen in the novel and in the movie in room 217 and 237 respectively. The Overlook was passed between several owners for the next few decades until 1945 when Robert Derwent bought it. Robert Derwent was a famous guy. He was extremely wealthy and also known for being a pilot, inventor, entrepreneur, and film producer. But unfortunately, he was also heavily involved in the Vegas mob. Because of this, after Derwent became the owner, the Overlook became a place that was notorious for mob activity, as well as some of the more violent scenes that are associated with that. Specifically, the one that we know about is a 1966 shooting where bodyguards of mob boss Vittorio Ginelli were gunned down outside the presidential suite, and then the assassin went in and killed him as well. There is also a man, Roger, who was infatuated with Derwent, but Derwent wouldn't make their relationship public and would make him wear a dog mask all the time, which is also where that weird scene in the movie with the guy in the dog costume comes from. It's also weird in the book. It's not quite the same, but it's also very bizarre. But after Derwent was divorced, his wife owned it for a few years until it was passed around between investment groups and then eventually bought by High Country Investments, who are the current owners. Then in 1970, the previous caretaker, Delbert Grady, cut his two daughters and wife up with an axe and then killed himself by putting a shotgun in his mouth. He is also an important person who we will see reappear in the Overlook several times. And then in 1977, the Torrances arrive. So anyways, that is a short and at least mostly accurate, hopefully, history of the Overlook Hotel. There's more to it, but that's everything you absolutely need to know. Jack develops such an obsession about the history of the Overlook over the course of their stay that he actually abandons the play that he was working on, which was one of the main reasons why they agreed to do the job at the Overlook at all, was so he could finish his play. But he abandons it to start writing a book about the Overlook because he is kind of collating the history of the hotel. and this leads to a very intense phone call with Mr. Ullman, the hotel manager. Most of the Overlook's history, savory and unsavory alike, I found in a scrapbook that was in the cellar. Big thing with white leather covers, gold thread for binding. Do you have any idea whose scrapbook that might be? None at all. Is it possible it could have belonged to Grady, the caretaker who killed himself? Mr. Torrance, Ullman said in tones of deepest frost, I am by no means sure that Mr. Grady could read, let alone dig out the rotten apples you have been wasting my time with. I'm thinking about writing a book about the Overlook Hotel. I thought if I actually got through it, the owner of the scrapbook would like to have an acknowledgement at the front. I think writing a book about the Overlook would be very unwise, Ullman said, especially a book done from your, point of view. Your opinion doesn't surprise me. His headache was all gone now. There had been that one flash of pain, and that was all. His mind felt sharp and accurate, all the way down to millimeters. It was the way he usually felt only when the writing was going extremely well or when he had a 3-drink buzz on. That was another thing he had forgotten about Excedrin. He didn't know if it worked for others, but for him, crunching 3 tablets was like an instant high. Now he said, what you'd like is some sort of commissioned guidebook that you could hand out free to the guests when they check in. Something with a lot of glossy photos of the mountains at sunrise and sunset and a lemon meringue text to go with it. Also a section on the colorful people who have stayed here. Of course, excluding the really colorful ones like Janelli and his friends. If I felt I could fire you and be 100% certain of my own job instead of just 95%, Ullman said in clipped, strangled tones, I would fire you right this minute over the telephone. But since I feel that 5% of uncertainty, I intend to call Mr. Shockley the moment you're off the line. Which will be soon, or so I devoutly hope. Jack said, there isn't going to be anything in the book that isn't true, you know. There's no need to dress it up. Why are you baiting him? Do you want to be fired? I don't care if Chapter 5 is about the Pope of Rome skewering the shade of the Virgin Mary, Ullman said, his voice rising. I want you out of my hotel. It's not your hotel, Jack screamed and slammed the receiver into its cradle. He sat on the stool, breathing hard, a little scared now. A little? Hell, a lot. Wondering why, in the name of God, he had called Ullman in the first place. You lost your temper again, Jack. For a little bit of context, he really just called Ullman out of the blue to interrogate him about the bad things that have happened in the past at the Overlook. You can also imagine that a hotel this nice would not be super excited about a book airing out all of its dirty laundry, especially when it's a hotel like the Overlook that has had so many scandals in its past. As much as Jack doesn't really care about Ullman's opinion, which is fair, Ullman is kind of a dick. He does have to care about Al's opinion, and Al's not happy about his call to Ullman or the book that Jack threatened to write about the Overlook. Stu says you're planning to do a little dirty laundry airing yourself. Stu's an asshole, he barked into the phone. I told him I had an idea of writing about the Overlook, yes. I do. I think this place forms an index of the whole post-World War II American character. That sounds like an inflated claim stated so baldly. I know it does. But it's all here, Al. My God, it could be a great book. But it's far in the future, I can promise you that. I've got more on my plate right now than I can eat, and... Jack, it's not good enough. He found himself gaping at the black receiver of the phone, unable to believe what he had surely heard. What? Al, did you say? I said what I said. How far is far in the future, Jack? For you, it may be 2 years, maybe 5. For me, it's 30 or 40. Because I expect to be associated with the Overlook for a long time. The thought of you doing some sort of scum job on my hotel and passing it off as a great piece of American writing, that makes me sick. Jack was speechless. I tried to help you, Jackie boy. We went through the war together, and I thought I owed you some help. You remember the war? I remember it, he muttered, but the coals of resentment had begun to glow around his heart. First Ullman, then Wendy, now Al. What was this, National Let's Pick Jack Torrance Apart Week? He clamped his lips more tightly together, reaching for his cigarettes, and knocked them off onto the floor. Had he ever really liked this cheap prick talking to him from his mahogany-lined den in Vermont? Had he really? Before you hit that Hatfield kid, Al was saying, I had talked the board out of letting you go and even had them swung around to considering tenure. You blew that one for yourself. I got you this hotel thing. A nice quiet place for you to get yourself together, finish your play, and waited out until Henry Effinger and I could convince the rest of those guys that they made a big mistake. Now it looks like you want to chew my arm off on your way to a bigger killing. Is that a way to say thanks to your friends, Jack? No, he whispered. What? Al said sharply. No, he said. That's not the way I treat my friends, and you know it. How do I know it? At the worst, you're planning to smear my hotel by digging up bodies that were decently buried years ago. At the best, you call up my temperamental but extremely competent hotel manager and work him into a frenzy as part of some stupid kids game. It was more than a game, Al. It's easier for you. You don't have to take some rich friend's charity. You don't need a friend in court because you are the court. The fact that you were one step from a brown bag lush goes pretty much unmentioned, doesn't it? I suppose it does, Al said. His voice had dropped a notch, and he sounded tired of the whole thing. But Jack, I can't help that. I can't change that. I know, said Jack emptily. Am I fired? I guess you better tell me if I am. Not if you do two things for me. All right. Hadn't you better hear the conditions before you accept them? No. Give me your deal and I'll take it. There's Wendy and Danny to think about. If you want my balls, I'll send them airmail. Are you sure self-pity is a luxury you can afford, Jack? He had closed his eyes and slid an Excedrin between his dry lips. At this point, I feel like it's the only one I can afford. Fire away. No pun intended. Al was silent for a moment. Then he said, First, no more calls to Ullman. Not even if the place burns down. If that happens, call the maintenance man. That guy who swears all the time. You know who I mean. Watson? Yes. Okay, done. Second, you promise me, Jack, word of honor, no book about a famous Colorado mountain hotel with a history. Throughout the story, Al has been nothing but helpful to Jack. I get where Jack is coming from, that Al is rich, and so he doesn't have to answer to people like Jack does, but that's not Al's fault, and like he said, there's nothing really he can do about that. In the novel, Jack is supposed to be 30 years old, quite a bit younger than Jack Nicholson was when he portrayed him. Jack Nicholson was 43. Even so, I think this type of behavior is just absolutely ridiculous from a man who has a family to support and a 6-year-old child. First of all, I think he has every right to write the book, but don't go around announcing it to everybody who has a financial interest in the hotel. That makes no sense. Secondly, why would you ask Ullman in the first place? You already know he doesn't like you. You already don't get along with him, and you already know he's like a tight ass. He's not going to tell you anything that you aren't going to find yourself. There's really no reason to call him except to just get in a fight with him, which is a nonsensical reason to call him. Just absolutely childish and naive behavior from a 30-year-old man, which, by the way, is the same age that I am, so I feel like I have every right to say that. But while this is the first time that things really start to go haywire during their stay at the Overlook, it is not the first time that something mysterious happens. One of the other tasks besides venting the boiler that Jack has to make sure he takes care of is reshingling the roof in one of the wings of the hotel, and while reshingling the roof, he happens upon a wasp's nest. He does what probably most reasonable people would do in this situation and bug bombs the hell out of it, killing all the wasps. The weird thing he does comes afterwards when Danny asks if he can keep the nest, which is now empty of wasps, obviously. Jack agrees and lets him put it in his room. Wendy is pretty skeptical about this, but Jack thinks it's perfectly safe. He even says he had one in his room when he was a kid. He came running to her with a large gray thing in his hands, and for one comic, horrible moment, Wendy thought it was a brain. She saw what it really was and recoiled instinctively. Jack put an arm around her. It's all right. The tenants who didn't fly away have been shaken out. I used the bug bomb. She looked at the large wasp nest her son was holding but would not touch it. Are you sure it's safe? Positive. I had one in my room when I was a kid. My dad gave it to me. Want to put it in your room, Danny? Yeah, right now. He turned around and raced through the double doors. They could hear his muffled running feet on the main stairs. Now here's the kicker. The bug bomb did work. All the wasps in it were obviously dead, but that night it doesn't seem to be the case anymore. There's definitely some stuff to unpack here. Firstly, the most obvious part that the wasps came back to life, it seems like because of the Overlook, which makes sense kind of thematically because ghosts and things are present, and it's also the hotel starting to manifest some of the power that it's receiving from Danny's shining. But there's also a deeper theme here. Jack's father was an alcoholic who was physically abusive to both his children and his wife, but Jack has a complex relationship with his dad because he loved him regardless of that. Danny and Jack are also extremely close, and we see a lot of parallels between Jack and his father and Danny's relationship with his dad. The wasp is a pretty on-the-nose symbolism for the trauma and possibly a genetic disposition towards alcohol that Jack has passed down to Danny by continuing the cycle of violence that his father perpetuated. A lot of the other events in the novel, I've had a very hard time connecting to themes for the story, but this one I feel pretty spot on with. Again, this is another thing that makes the movie not a great adaptation, and to be honest, this is not an uncommon thing. These types of themes are usually the first thing that get tossed aside when we're doing adaptations from books to movies. But this wasp scene probably sounds extremely foreign to you if you've never read the book, because it was completely cut from the movie, and along with anything that really gave the audience any sort of empathy for Jack. By cutting all of the evidence of his care for his own family, the movie has turned Jack from a character who, even if he isn't relatable, we can at least have moments of sympathy and empathy for, into someone who is just a psychotic, deranged killer. For example, there is this scene in the book right after Jack gives Danny the wasp's nest where Jack and Wendy are talking. Jack got up and the two of them stood together watching Danny charge up the lawn and then take the steps to the porch 2x2. He put an arm around Wendy's waist. "You happy, babe?" She looked at him solemnly. "This is the happiest I've been since we were married." "Is that the truth?" "God's honest." He squeezed her tightly. "I love you." She squeezed him back, touched. Those had never been cheap words with John Torrance. She could count the number of times he had said them to her, both before and after marriage, on both hands. "I love you too." I can't really imagine this guy having that conversation with his family at all.
Whenever you come in here and interrupt me, you're breaking my concentration. You're distracting me. And it will then take me time to get back to where I was. Understand?
Yeah.
The third and final task that Jack has to do before the snow falls is trim the topiary. Before you ask if you are unfamiliar with what topiary is, according to Wikipedia, this is the definition: the horticultural practice of training perennial plants by clipping the foliage and twigs of trees, shrubs, and subshrubs to develop and maintain clearly defined shapes, whether geometric or fanciful. Basically, it's when they trim hedges to look like real objects or animals. Part of the reason that Al was actually able to convince the board to hire Jack is because Jack has some experience from when he worked at a landscaping company in college, where he has actually trimmed these types of topiary hedges before. But when he goes out to trim them, the topiary isn't exactly as it seems. The rabbit was down on all fours, cropping grass. Its belly was against the ground. But not 10 minutes ago, it had been up on its hind legs. Of course it had been. He had trimmed its ears and its belly. His eyes darted to the dog. When he had come down the path, it had been sitting up, as if begging for a sweet. Now it was crouched, head tilted, the clipped wedge of mouth seeming to snarl silently, and the lions. The lions were closer to the path. The two on his right had subtly changed positions, had drawn closer together. The tail of the one on the left now almost jutted out over the path. When he had come past them and through the gate, that lion had been on the right, and he was sure its tail had been curled around it. They were no longer protecting the path. They were blocking it. Jack put his hand suddenly over his eyes and then took it away. The picture didn't change. A soft sigh, too quiet to be a groan, escaped him. In his drinking days, he had always been afraid of something like this happening. But when you were a heavy drinker, you called it the DTs. Good old Ray Milland in Lost Weekend, seeing the bugs coming out of the walls. What did you call it when you were cold sober? The question was meant to be rhetorical, but his mind answered it. You call it insanity. So the topiary moves and might even attack you if you don't get back to the hotel fast enough. This alone would be bad enough to make us wonder if Jack is really losing it or if the topiary is really alive, but Danny has a similar harrowing experience earlier in the book. From behind him, that soft flump sound of falling snow came again. He turned around and the head of one of the hedge lions was sticking out of the snow now, snarling at him. It was closer than it should have been, almost up to the gate of the playground. Terror tried to rise up and he quelled it. He was the secret agent man, and he would escape. He began to walk out of the playground, taking the same roundabout course his father had taken on the day that the snow flew. He concentrated on operating the snowshoes. Slow, flat strides. Don't lift your foot too high or you'll lose your balance. Twist your ankle and spill the snow off the crisscrossed lacings. It seemed so slow. He reached the corner of the playground. The snow was drifted high here, and he was able to step over the fence. He got halfway over and then almost fell flat when the snowshoe on his behind foot caught on one of the fence posts. He leaned on the outside edge of gravity, pinwheeling his arms, remembering how hard it was to get up once you fell down. You'd think that this would create a moment with Jack where hearing his son's experience would assuage any fears he has that he is going crazy, and also give him an opportunity to relate to his son and comfort him that he experienced something similar. But instead, weirdly, he tries to deny it, saying that he doesn't believe Danny and he needs to teach Danny what's real and what's a hallucination. He told them about the soft sound of snow falling in clumps, about the lion with its head and its bunched shoulders working its way up and out of the snow to chase him. He even told them about how the rabbit had turned its head to watch near the end. They chased me, he finished. Jack got up and went over to the window, his back to them. He looked at his mommy. They chased me all the way up to the porch. He was struggling to keep his voice calm, because if he stayed calm, maybe they would believe him. Danny, come over here. Jack turned around. His face still had that pinched, deathly look. Danny didn't like to look at it. Jack, I just want the boy over here for a minute. Danny slipped off the sofa and came over beside his daddy. Good boy. Now what do you see? Danny had known what he would see even before he got to the window. Below the clutter of boot tracks, sled tracks, and snowshoe tracks that marked their usual exercise area, the snowfield that covered the Outlook's lawn sloped down to the topiary and the playground beyond. It was marred by two sets of tracks, one of them in a straight line from the porch to the playground, the other a long looping line coming back up. Only my tracks, Daddy, but... What about the hedges, Danny? Danny's lips began to tremble. He was going to cry. What if he couldn't stop? I won't cry. I won't cry. Won't. All covered with snow, he whispered. But Daddy... What? I couldn't hear you. Jack, you're cross-examining him. Can't you see he's upset? He's... Shut up. Well, Danny? They scratched me, Daddy. My leg... You must have cut your leg on the crust of the snow. Then Wendy was between them, her face pale and angry. What are you trying to make him do? She asked him. Confess to murder? What's wrong with you? Danny pulled away. Suddenly he had it. It had flashed into his mind all at once, the way things sometimes did, the way it had about the woman wanting to be in that gray man's pants. He stared at his father with widening eyes. You know I'm telling the truth, he whispered, shocked. Danny? Jack's face tightening. You know because you saw... The sound of Jack's open palm striking Danny's face was flat, not dramatic at all. The boy's head rocked back. The palm print reddening on his cheek was like a brand. This is personally where my empathy ends for Jack. He had the opportunity here to admit that something was wrong and work together with his family to either solve it or come up with, what they should do next. But instead, he decides to impose his own denial on his son and also physically harm him. To be clear, this signals a regression for Jack. Previously, we had only heard of him hurting Danny the one other time, and that genuinely seemed to be carelessness more than malice. Not that that makes it okay, obviously, but it does change our understanding of Jack's character and motivations. These three tasks that we just talked about, venting the boiler, reshingling the roof, and trimming the topiary, are really the avenues through which we see Jack's change and degradation. The movie really only shows Jack's degradation, what little of it there is that's necessary, through him just creepily staring, acting weird, and yelling at Wendy for virtually no reason. Again, the book and the movie don't really agree, but there is one place where they do agree, and that is in Jack's last step in his descent towards anger, which is his relapse. Hello, boys, Jack Torrance said softly. I've been away, but now I'm back. Good evening, Mr. Torrance, Lloyd said, genuinely pleased. It's good to see you. It's good to be back, Lloyd, he said gravely, and hooked his leg over a stool between a man in a sharp blue suit and a bleary-eyed woman in a black dress who was peering into the depths of a Singapore sling. What will it be, Mr. Torrance? Martini, he said with great pleasure. He looked at the back bar with its rows of dimly gleaming bottles capped with their silver siphons. Jim Beam, Wild Turkey, Gilbey's, Sherrod's Private Label, Toro, Seagram's, and home again.
Hi, Lloyd. Been away, but now I'm back. Good evening, Mr. Torrance.
The dialogue isn't word for word, but the whole scene goes down pretty much the same way in both the movie and the book. He's at this wild party, drinking until he runs into Grady, who is the previous caretaker who took the lives of both his wife and his two children. They go back and forth until Grady convinces Jack that his son and wife need to be put in their place, implying that they need to be physically harmed and shown kind of who the boss is. And then we're basically in the final section of the movie and the final section of the book. Yes, we could talk about how in the movie he uses an axe instead of a roke or like a fancy croquet mallet like he does in the book, but to be honest, I'm not really that concerned about that minor of a change. I can just see in the comments already there's going to be like one guy who writes like an essay about how the roke mallet symbolically is like important to Jack and his like anger or something and how it's pivotal to the plot, but I'm just going to ignore that guy. But something we will talk about is a very important character to the story, the man who introduces Danny to his powers, and contrary to what movie watchers think, someone who is really important to the plot, Dick Halloran. Dick Halloran is done so dirty in this movie, and honestly, we didn't talk about it as much in the beginning of the movie because they actually stick pretty close to the original story there. Halloran shows Wendy around the kitchen, and then Halloran and Danny talk one-on-one. But it's just in the kitchen instead of his car, which kind of tones down the child predator vibes a little bit, which I actually think was kind of a good decision. And yes, in the movie, they cut some scenes where Dick is in his hometown. But honestly, in my opinion, that stuff is mostly flavor and character building and isn't super necessary to how the plot pans out. I would have loved if they had had time for all of that background story on Dick in the movie, but honestly, in movie adaptations, this kind of stuff is a lot of the things that make it to the chopping block first. But where they really do Halloran a disservice is actually in the end of the movie, where after he shows up, Jack just stabs or slashes him with an axe, and then he just dies and we never see him again. In the original story, Halloran basically saves both Wendy and Danny. He is the only reason that there is a snowmobile to get them out of there, and he basically drags a traumatized Wendy and Danny to safety and keeps them both from freezing to death. Genuinely, if there is a hero in this story, it is Dick Halloran, and in the movie, they literally don't develop his character at all and then kill him 2 seconds after he shows up, and he contributes basically nothing. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, screenwriter Diane Johnson, who wrote the script with Kubrick, said the following: "One of Kubrick's mandates for reshaping the final act was that an innocent character had to die. In the book, nobody gets killed except Jack, and Kubrick really thought somebody should get killed because it was a horror movie. So we weighed the dramatic possibilities of killing off various characters and did different treatments. We actually talked it over in detail, the possibility of having different people getting killed." So Kubrick just kind of decided that not enough people died in this story, which feels very arbitrary, and also that the determining factor between it being good and a horror movie would be killing one innocent person or not. I'm not the first person to criticize this decision, but it really just feels like such a waste of a good character, and also has so many cascading effects that you have to change about the story if you decide to kill Dick Halloran because he is so important in the original one. I could talk about this all day, but what we should really talk about is the ending, which is where really the most changes and the most controversy comes in. This may surprise you if you're just a movie watcher, but the ending to the book is completely different than it is in Kubrick's film. So let me give you a list of all the things that are different, and then we can go on and talk about each one of them individually. So Jack doesn't freeze to death outside. In the last few moments of his life, Jack actually takes back over as the Overlook has possessed him and lets Danny get away. Then Jack dies and the Overlook burns down. So that boiler that I mentioned earlier, besides being a symbol for Jack's anger, it's also the thing that kills him, which is fitting. His most important duty as the caretaker, which is something that Jack emphasizes a lot more in the book, is to keep the hotel safe. The most important thing to keep the hotel safe is to make sure it doesn't burn down, which he is supposed to do by venting the boiler all the time. But it's not only Jack forgetting towards the end of the novel about his responsibility to do this in the rush of attempted murder and all the other events that go down. It's also the Overlook forgetting about this task and not realizing that this will lead to its demise. How much redemption Jack gets for sacrificing his own life to save Jack and Wendy is something that is up for debate. But what it does show us is, at least at his core, when Jack is fully in control, he does love and care about his family more than he cares about his work or his success, which is kind of a defining character moment that was cut from the movie. "You're not my daddy," Danny told it. "And if there's a little bit of my daddy left inside you, he knows they lie here. Everything is a lie and a cheat. Like the loaded dice my daddy got for my Christmas stocking last Christmas. Like the presents they put in the store window, and my daddy says there's nothing in them. No presents. They're just empty boxes. Just for show, my daddy says. You're it, not my daddy. You're the hotel. And when you get what you want, you won't give my daddy anything because you're selfish. And my daddy knows that. You had to make him drink the bad stuff. That's the only way you could get him, you lying false face. Liar, liar. The words came in a thin shriek. The mallet wavered wildly in the air. Go on and hit me, but you'll never get what you want from me. The face in front of him changed. It was hard to say how, but there was no melting or merging of the features. The body trembled slightly, and then the bloody hands opened like broken claws. The mallet fell from them and thumped to the rug. That was all. But suddenly his daddy was there, looking at him, in mortal agony, and a sorrow so great that Danny's heart flamed within his chest. The mouth drew down in a quivering bow. Doc, Jack Torrance said, run away, quick, and remember how much I love you. Jack doesn't get any kind of character redemption at the end of the movie, probably because it would be really confusing to the audience why this guy who was crazy the whole time is suddenly good at the last moment. But the point is, if you hadn't changed a million other things, then you probably wouldn't have to change this so much either. As I mentioned when I was talking about Dick Halloran, they don't just go back into the hotel and wait till the Forest Service arrives. They literally have to snowmobile back to the nearest town through a snowstorm with Dick Halloran. I don't really have too much to say about this one. This change isn't super consequential, but more of like the cumulative effect of all the other things they've changed up to this point, so it kind of just can't work out this way anymore. The last and final thing is that Jack isn't in some like random picture in the hotel at the end, obviously, because it burns down. This is like the most frustrating change to me. I feel like this is the most I'm 14 and this is deep section of the movie, and honestly, I just don't really understand it. What is it actually implying? Honestly, to me, it doesn't really seem like it implies anything. It just feels like it's purposefully vague to give people something to talk about. You could, I guess, argue that it implies that Jack is like, his spirit is like living in the hotel or something now, or that the whole thing took place in Danny's head and Jack has always been there. I don't know, but there's probably been like thousands of YouTube videos made about this, if not more. Regardless of the intended implication, which I truly do think is that Jack's spirit like entered the hotel afterwards, I don't really think that it adds anything to the movie, like thematically. Like, it doesn't wrap things up any more than it would have if he was just dead. I think maybe it suggests slightly that the hotel was more involved than they really show, but not really. I think it just further confuses the plot and kind of the themes of the movie. There is sort of an epilogue that the movie cut out, which again is not something I'm really super concerned about. Nothing super big plot-wise happens in it, and I think cutting out an epilogue like this is pretty standard when it comes to an adaptation, especially when it isn't intended to have a sequel, even though both the book and this movie did eventually have a sequel, but it's fairly short and sweet. Danny and Wendy are visiting Halloran in his new place of work, the Red Arrow Lodge in western Maine. They discuss how their lives will go on, how Al Shockley got Wendy a job, and they have some money from Jack's life insurance to pay for Danny to go to college. Danny and Halloran have this moment where Danny talks about how he misses his dad and how he blames himself for everything that happened. Again, kind of connecting back to one of the primary themes of the novel, which is the cycle of violence that comes from abuse. Danny has similar feelings about Jack that Jack had about his father, knowing that he did a lot wrong, but also loving him and missing him regardless of that. Then Danny catches a fish, and it's basically over. The ending is, in my opinion, the most egregious change to this movie. That and Wendy's entire character being different. Like, the ending really just is classic slasher horror, granted pretty early on before a lot of the tropes had really been established. But in the novel, it's almost more like a drama and less horror. Yes, it's scary. Yes, it's tense. But at the core of it, there is a story about trauma, about violence, and about the things that we pass on to our children without meaning to. There's so much heart in the original story, and I think, honestly, a lot of vulnerability from King, which is why I think this ends up being the adaptation that he badmouths the most, especially because I think that even King has said he related the most to Jack Torrance when he was writing him out of any of the other characters that he's written, which I think on the surface is a little bit concerning, especially if you've only seen the movie. But I think if you've read the book, you kind of maybe understand more where he's coming from. At the end of the day, is The Shining a bad movie? No, I actually think it's a pretty good movie. It was one of my favorite horror movies for a very long time. But is it a good adaptation? No, I think it's a pretty abysmal adaptation. It kind of misses the whole point of the entire book. It also changes almost every single character in a way that makes them almost unrecognizable from the characters in the original story. It takes what was truly an incredible story with a lot of depth and turns it into a well-shot slasher film with some excellent acting. I think if I was King and someone had reinterpreted my work this dramatically and changed everything about it, that I would be pretty upset too. In the early 2000s, Stephen King actually wrote and executive produced a TV miniseries that was based on The Shining that was pretty faithful to the book. You can watch Jack's scene from both the end of the movie and the end of the TV miniseries, and you'll see what I mean about how different they are. This is like an epic level of pettiness on King's part, by the way, to take what was like basically already extremely successfully adapted and just adapted himself, I would assume kind of out of spite. The show isn't very good either, the miniseries. I might do a dedicated video about it, but regardless of whether I do, while I was actually writing this video, Super Eyepatch Wolf made a video about the Shining TV show. I don't agree with all his opinions, but I do think that it's a really well made video, and it's not video essay style, it's more ranty, but I do think that it's interesting to kind of hear he kind of has a little bit maybe the opposite opinion of the movie and the book as I do. So I'll link it in the description below. So that's how everything was changed in The Shining. There's like a million other little things that I couldn't get to or that aren't worth talking about because they're so small. But I tried to cover all the major things here. But I just wanted to thank you preemptively in case you decide to click off now before I hit the outro that, for watching this whole video and for sticking around for the whole thing, giving me so much time out of your day. If you would like to see me do any videos like this about book to movie adaptations, let me know which ones. I'm entertaining all ideas at this point. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you guys like the video, like it, leave a comment if you have any feedback, or if you have anything positive to say, I'd love to hear it. And subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this, because I'm already working on the next one, which is kind of a secret still. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.